in today's reading from Proverbs jumped out at me this week as I was looking at it. And it's different in different translations, like real different. And so I'm going to share one of the translations, and then I'll connect it to the message that we heard this morning. So this is the general line that really struck me. It's the first line. Does not wisdom call, and does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights, beside the way at the crossroads, she takes her stand. In the message this morning, the line was, at first and main, at the intersection. So this idea, this image of the crossroads at the in-between space. The temporary pause, this choice point, a place between one way or another. Which way do I go? Who do I listen to? What do I do now? How long can I sit here in the unknown before someone honks at me? Or how long can I sit here before I gotta get going? And so the crossroads is this space of unknowing, and that's what I want to focus on today, is this emotional space that so many of us touch upon in our lives, these crossroads moments between what is and what will be. So I'm going to share 3 stories today. And the first one happened right here in Tacoma. I've lived here for a couple years. So this happened a couple years ago, right when I got here. And a friend of mine invited me to a Saturday morning gathering of men. And it wasn't religious, and it wasn't connected to a faith or a denomination, but it was really spiritual. Everyone was there as a practice. It wasn't a particularly fun group. We didn't chat or talk about what our lives were like really outside of that space. It wasn't a social club, and the reason I call it a gathering of men is that it wasn't really a men's group either. Those have very specific connotations for a lot of us. But everyone who was there as a spiritual practice. They were there because the space in the morning served as a container for them to be able to come and share something and be seen by people who might not see them any other point. For those of you who maybe have family in AA or who have gone through AA, I've heard, especially folks who are in AA who are in that space, that there was a similar feeling there. So I'm going to paint a picture of something that happened to me. Here's what it looked like most Saturdays. We would gather in some people's homes, and we would sit on whatever furniture they had. Sometimes it was just sitting on the floor. Sometimes it was sitting on couches, chairs, whatever people had. And someone would bring a question, and it would be someone who had signed up for that month. And they would bring a question that we would be invited to sit with and explore in our own stories. So it wasn't intellectual. It was very much like a question that strikes to the depth of one's experience of life. And I'm going to share one in a moment. After the question was raised, we would then begin to sit in silence for 20 minutes. And the purpose of that, for some would be meditation. How do I clear my mind? For some, they would pray in the traditions that they were taught. I'm going to spend this time connecting with God. For me, I fell asleep several times. So this is just whatever was needed in that 20 minutes, I suppose. It was very real. But I think for me, what really got to me in those moments was that sitting in silence with people you don't know is an act of vulnerability. It's an act of, I'm not puffing out my chest, especially in a group of men. I'm not puffing out my chest. I'm not fronting. I'm not talking about work. I'm just here. And so we would sit in silence, and then we would take a quick break. And the question would be raised again. And using a talking piece, we would go around, whoever had something to respond to the question with would share. Some people would take 8 minutes. Some people would get the talking piece and say, well, this is what I'm feeling right now. It would take 10 seconds, and they'd pass it on. So whatever someone felt moving within them. And here's what was different, really different about the space. As these questions were offered and people were sharing, no one was allowed to respond to each other. So we were just there as witnessers. As witnesses, I suppose is the real word. We were there to learn to listen to someone without doing the usual thing that I'm seeing right now, which is people like head nodding. The body language we show that in much of Western culture shows that we are listening and engaged. It was a practice of don't even do that. Just listen and notice. A side note, for people who have been raised as boys and then men, there was another aspect of this that was so countercultural, because if you can't respond, you can't fix. And so this was a space of like no fixing, saving, advising, correcting. You were just listening. And so much of maleness in my experience has been wrapped up with this sense of control and supremacy, that I can fix this and it's mine to fix. And so this space was very countercultural in that way. It was a practice space, a place for us to learn how to listen. So one morning in particular, I showed up to group. I didn't know what the question was going to be. I just showed up because that's what we did. We were in this room, 26-year-olds to probably the oldest among us was 84. We did our silent sit, and then the question was raised. And the question this morning, the reason I'm sharing is it's connected to our sacred story today. The question was, what crossroads are you at in your life right now? You can see how it's not an intellectual question. That strikes at the core of what is your experience. What crossroads are you at in your life right now? And it hit me because everyone had something to share. Because everyone is always at a crossroads of one kind or another. Maybe it's a relational crossroads. Maybe it's a internal dreams I've had for myself crossroads. What do I do now? What did I maybe want to do that didn't happen, and how do I continue? Professional crossroads. Where am I going? What's the next step up the ladder that I've been told I must take? So there's all these kinds of different crossroads. One that I encountered just a couple days ago was a friend of mine who's a parent was told by their child that they're trans. And the parent had all these stories about their child that were in their heads. And so they had a crossroads moment. What do I do with knowing that my kid is experiencing the world in a way that I don't fully understand? But I now get to make a choice at this crossroads of how do I respond and how do I be here compassionately and lovingly. So this question of crossroads, it rattled around in me a bunch. So our sacred story today is about wisdom at the crossroads. And it's about that wisdom is in the crossroads. I loved that in the message, it sounded like wisdom was shouting at people. There was like, look at, notice this, the wisdom is here for you. It was very communal. When I read it very personally. I read it as wisdom is in the subtleties of life. When you're in your crossroads moments and you make a choice and you realize, oh, this is the healthy choice for me. But it's like a whisper of wisdom. So I love the differences there. For me, wisdom is most often in the muck of life. It's in the crossroads moments or the decision points of life when things just aren't working out great. So I want to share a story around that for me. Growing up, I grew up in Seattle and then, mostly Seattle. La Conner for a little bit, Skagit Valley. But as I was growing up, I was very much taught to be a fixer, a saver, a corrector. I was taught to be an agent of change, an agent of justice. And what I said about the messaging that boys and men receive, that was very real for me in my life. But it wasn't just that. As a person with a white body, I was being taught by Sean Connery and Finding Forrester and other movies and television that it was my job to save people of color. Or as a person who grew up in the Methodist Church with our big mission of transforming the world, what I internalized was that the world was inherently flawed and that it was mine and by my actions that saving occurs. I got to be a disciple. I got to make disciples because that's the shot we've got. And so I took all that in, and all those messages were internalized in me. And as messages do when they're internalized, they become beliefs. So here I was, a little kid, walking around with these big beliefs around who I was, these stories I would tell myself about myself, and these stories, these beliefs about how the world works. Got through college, I became a teacher, and when I walked into my first classroom, all that stuff came with me, right, as it always does. And so I stepped into my classroom, and my classroom became the place where I was going to save the world. I could fix things here, and there were really good positives. To this day, I'm proud of my curriculum. The curriculum I created was student-centered, really focused on what are their stories, what social justice causes do they want to lean into, what are their experiences. I was high school. What are their experiences of the world, and how do they want their stories to speak into those experiences? But it also brought with it the problematic. I came into my classroom with an image of this is my place to shape into my own image. This is my domain. And then I made what has been the most fatal flaw of my teaching career, to this point at least. I became our building union representative. And it was great. It was great. There were really good positives there. But what ended up happening is, as a building rep, I was there to very much stand in between the contract breaking and the teachers. And so I had a very big place I got to be the good protector of the folks, of the teachers, of my colleagues. And so once again, I chose to be in this position where I could puff my chest as the good protector of the people. Every day I would go into work, it would feel like a war zone. For those of you who maybe have a boss or have had a boss that you don't see eye to eye with, it was that every day. And so I would go to battle every single day with my principal, and it felt at times as if it was a holy war, because I was on the good side. I was on the right side. I was here to change the world, and this is the way I'm going to do it because I'm right, and you are wrong. And so I did that for 2 years. And for those of you who have lived in an environment or worked in an environment like that for 2 years, you get constricted. The way you see the world begins to tighten. You start to see or think you're seeing threats around every corner. And so before long, I would start going home. And my home would become an extension of this war zone. I was living with a then fiance at the time, and the relationship just tanked. And it fell apart. And I didn't know what was happening because I wasn't in tune with what was happening internally. I didn't notice that my frustrations at work were boiling over, were coming over. And so in this emotional state, I would get home and I would walk around the landmines, doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing. And there was one night in particular that it all broke. I later called this my ride of rage, because I teach English, and that sounds nice. So this was my ride of rage. My partner and I were sitting on the couch. We're having this conversation, this debate, this argument. It was an argument. And I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't know what to do. This internal anger that had been bubbling was going, and I didn't know what to do. And so I said, I got to go. And I stepped outside. I got my bicycle, and I just rode hard. I live on Proctor and 9th. And so I was just going straight up Proctor. And I just remember my feet pushing, the wheels turning, the pedals going. And before long, I was in a neighborhood I didn't know. I had shot past Proctor. I had never been in this area. I'd taken a couple turns. And it's pitch black outside. And my body, I am not a bicyclist, my body was going like, you got to stop. And so I was slowly coming to the end. I'm breathing hard. I'm in a place I don't know. And all of a sudden, I realized, as I come to a stop, I realized something's got to shift. This isn't my responses here have a part to play. And when I look back, I think about that as a crossroads. I think what I was realizing was that I was at a crossroads. It was the yucky, tension-filled, ugly, uncomfortable, crunchy space between what is and what will be. Realizing you can't keep going, something's got to change, but you've got no idea and you're afraid of it. I knew that if I stayed on autopilot, I'd keep angering at the world, but I'd be able to stay right. I'd be right. But I'd be on autopilot. And we do, side note, we have a name for folks who never examine their crossroad moments and who stay on autopilot and grow old. We call them curmudgeons, right? So this was a choice for me. Do I want to expand my capacity to be a curmudgeon? Or I can sit in the unknown and I can listen. I can figure out what is the lesson this crossroads moment is attempting to teach me. What do I need to hear right now? What control or need for control do I need to learn how to sit and let go of? And we have a name for older folks who learn how to do that as well, how to sit at the crossroads and sit in the unknown. We call them wise. We call them elders. They have met Sophia. They've met wisdom at the crossroads, even if they didn't know in the moment. But this dichotomy showed up in me. Do I want to choose to lean into the curmudgeondom of needing to be in control, needing to buckle down and go and be right? Or can I learn to sit in the unknown and learn to listen kindly and compassionately, which is much more of what I see, at least in my life, and you can figure out in yours, of elders. of true elders, the ones who listen and know how to be open to the moment. So here's a final thought. This is around wisdom in particular, and it's still working in me, so this isn't fully fleshed out. But I really want to offer this to you as you leave today to think about and maybe grapple with, especially if you have young people in your lives. A couple of years ago, I was at an art gallery up in Seattle, and I was staring at this big painting, and I was staring because I was confused. I don't go to art studios a lot. I was just kind of confused. I don't really know how to look at art most of the time. It's a big white canvas, mostly blank. And when I say big, I mean probably the size of the screen. And etched on the bottom right side in small little letters was the phrase, "Kids are the future." And I loved it because I have a visceral memory. I grew up in Trinity United Methodist Church in Ballard in Seattle. And I have a visceral memory of the adults getting out of their Sunday morning learning lesson before service started. And I snuck in, and they had a big blackboard, and I wrote, "Kids are the future." And it was my rebellion against the adults, and then I ran away. So I'm looking at this big art piece, and I'm remembering this. I'm like, yeah, this is good. Let me sit and ponder this as people do at art studios. And this older man walks up to me silently, and he's taking his turn to look at the art piece as well. And he's standing there, and we're just kind of standing. And slowly, he turns a little bit towards me, and I panic. And I think, oh my God, this guy's going to talk to me. Okay, got to prepare. And he said, "Kids aren't the future, elders are." And I was flabbergasted because that goes against everything I think. Of course kids are the future. Of course we want our children to be better off than we are. Progress happens by generation continuing. And so that makes no sense. And so I turned to him slowly, and I asked him to explain because it didn't connect with me. And he said, and I later found out he was a leader in one of the indigenous tribes in the area. He said, "Our culture celebrates youth, especially teenagers, if we look at advertising. Our culture celebrates youth without understanding where they come from. Kids are taught by adults and by elders. They are a mirror of the maturity of the adults they have in their lives. And so without mature elders, we have immature kids." And I thought about this, and I've been grappling with it, this idea of kids as a mirror of the adults they have in their lives and the maturity of the adults they have in their lives. It's got some anecdotal positive for me as a teacher. Okay, there's enough there that I'm intrigued. But what I've really come down to thinking about is that what that means is that our future as a culture, as a society, if wisdom is not just speaking to us as individuals, but as us as a culture, what it really means is that our future is in the depth and the wisdom of our elders. Think about those crossroads moments. We need more folks, 30-year-olds all the way up, who have expanded their capacity in those crossroad moments to turn off autopilot. Amen. To recognize and get comfortable with the unknown, with the crunchiness of those moments, so that we can model it for younger generations. Our future is tied to whether or not we will each be and become mature elders. Not curmudgeons, but choosing to examine our crossroad moments where wisdom is, to sit curiously and creatively, openly, non-judgmentally, to let go of our needs for control and for supremacy, and to learn to listen and then to model that behavior. I want to share two things as you leave today, and I'll repeat these during the benediction. But if wisdom is at the crossroads, and everyone always has a crossroads, that means wisdom is always there available to us, waiting for us to choose to tap into it. And so here are two invitations for you this week. One is to spend some time examining your crossroad moments in your life. The Berenstain Bears taught me that it's never too late to fix a mistake. That is only partially relevant here. It's never too late to go back to a crossroads moment you have had and to sit with it until you have learned its lesson. And so what I'd invite you this week is to spend some time on your own. Go back to a crossroads moment that you have had in your life and sit with it and ask it, what's the lesson I could have learned here? What's the lesson that was here for me? And the second one is, if you have young people in your life, or if you have other people in your life, which all of you do, I'd invite you to really think about how can you hold a posture of openness and curiosity about them this week. How can you hold a posture of openness and curiosity? One of the big things I talk about a lot is constricting, how over time our narratives constrict us inwardly. The opposite of that is openness. And so as you're engaging with others, how can you have a posture of openness, letting them teach you lessons and letting the moment teach you lessons? But practice a posture that keeps you open and available for the wisdom that's there in every moment. Because our future, and this is what I was thinking about as I was listening to the message this morning, our future as a community, not just personally, it lies in the depth and wisdom of whether or not our elders, which we are all becoming if we're not there yet, it lies in the depth and the wisdom and the capacity we each have to internally process that wisdom, to embody it, and then to share it with others. So those are two things to practice this week. Homework, if you will. There, thank you.
Offering me